Here we go. We are live, Evolve Conversations. I think it's episode 19, but don't quote me on that, with Maddie Pryor. Thanks, Maddie, for joining us.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. So Maddie's in Hong Kong, getting up early for this one. But I met Maddie a couple of years ago at Mastermind Talks, and a credit to what Jason Gaynard and that community has created. You're intrigued by who you sit down to, because there's already some pretty heavy curation that's happened around why, who, and what you should be kind of sitting next to. And as soon as the topic of aviation came up, I was sitting next to two pilots from the military, and I was like, I've already got my money's worth. So Maddie and me went down some pretty big rabbit holes and became close friends, talked about a lot of things. And what I really wanted to kind of focus on today, and we are going to obviously evolve and go on different conversations, but Maddie's gone through a couple of transitions in life. And right now, the world's going through a transition period. Most of us might go through one, but Maddie's kind of gone from being a military pilot, going through a pretty quick transition into being a commercial pilot, but now is also an entrepreneur and creating amazing travel experiences. For you, Maddie, what have been some discoveries through those transition periods? Obviously, the first one, probably the hardest, because that's the first big transition. So,
it's just interesting you use the word hardest, Steve, because part of me likes it. You know, I see it as a reset button. I see it as sometimes people decide to make these transitions, and arguably, I'd say that's harder because you're making a conscious decision to go in a certain direction, and generally you're leaving a rut of comfort to go and do something quite uncomfortable, where a lot of people surrounding are just like, oh, is this a good idea, and what if this happens, and what if that happens? Whereas sometimes if somebody I don't know if you've done skydiving before, Stephen, we haven't spoken about this, but sometimes, or especially if you do it in the military, early jump, people get scared. And it's kind of, I'm not sure if I should say this publicly, but sometimes you just see this boot going out the door, the guy goes. And sometimes that's the best way, because you're sitting there just watching, laughing, thinking, all right, you either jump yourself or you're going to get a boot. Either way, you're going out that door. But just with that analogy, I think transitions are healthy. I think they're a great way to have a total reset on your life each time I do it. I think mine's from, I would say it was a transition. Beginning of course, and I got a piece of paper and just wrote down everything that I loved doing, everything that I thought I wanted to do in life, everything that interested me, and then try to organize those thoughts in terms of what direction am I going to go forward and what's my plan. And then I've just kept that. So I did that same thing when I was 27, going from the military transition into, and it wasn't as simple as just going military pilot to civilian pilot, as a lot of people think from outside in, because I went through all sorts of stuff. I kind of felt that I'd been blindsided a little bit, because I'd been signed up till I was 40, and this happened at 27, and it largely happened on the tail end of the last financial crash. And so who's to say it's not going to happen to a load of people in a couple of years, potentially all around the world, as the austerity kicks in again, as the funding gets a little bit tight, as budgets get cut. Who's going to be in the firing line next time? But I went through, do I be a war photographer? Do I be a CEO? Do I be an entrepreneur? Do I join special forces? Do I be an Apache pilot? Armed response? All sorts of different things went through my mind. And honestly, I still have a lot of these thoughts today. And the reason I became an airline pilot mainly was because the balance of time, because what I'd learned from the age of 12 to kind of 26 was this whole balance of time and money, in terms of there's no point having a load of time and no money, and vice versa. There's no point having a load of money and no time. And if you can give yourself that healthy balance of time and money, it gives you that space to experiment. And it doesn't need to be a lot of money, but just enough to cover the basics, and enough time outside like a normal 9 to 5. Like, people get really stressy and they give themselves, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes a day. Like, that's not really enough time to genuinely experiment and go down rabbit holes and talk to people and look at yourself in the mirror and work out a little bit who you are and where you want to go and who you want to be and who you want to surround yourself with. I mean, there's a lot of work here, and this isn't something that just happens overnight.
I'm intrigued by and we've had this conversation a few times, and thanks for sharing that. Is a lot of people say when transitioning to become an entrepreneur, you got to go all in, and you know where we're going with this. 110% go in, fully focused, and put everything else to the side and become an entrepreneur. And you challenged me on that back in Utah, and it's like, you know what, I'm going to challenge you on that. And you know what, being a pilot gives you the flexibility and the opportunities to be able to do something as a side hustle. Do you want to kind of like continue that dialogue? Because I think it's very intriguing, because a lot of people right now are going, I need to dive full into, because I've got this opportunity to be an entrepreneur, but you know what, maybe it's not the right thing.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to who you are and how you're wired. I think if you listen to a lot of podcasts and books and all that sort of stuff, I mean, honestly, Steve, I'm not sure how much I associate with the label of entrepreneur as such. I like the fact that ultimately it's solving problems and challenges going forward, and potentially there's a commercial opportunity on the other side. That's kind of how I process it. But I've always struggled with it, because for me, again, it comes back to that time and money. If you can give yourself a solid foundation just with the basics of life, you can really rip it in all the rest of areas of life. Like, you can really go for it, and arguably you can take way higher risks than if you're all in on something. You don't really have that balance and time and money sorted. You're trying to juggle all sorts of stuff. An opportunity comes along, and now the risk tolerance that you're about to kind of embark, it's so high that I think a lot of people are a bit scared to do it, or they do go all in. And just over these past few weeks, the amount of people I've spoken to about bankruptcies, and this is kind of like ruined relationships, and because they have gone all in, they never had that kind of backstop or that safety net. And I have had these conversations with lots of people. And like I say, I don't see myself as any particular expert in business by any means, but I do always fight the case for, look, just because somebody's got a side job and this is their side gig, or they've got a passion or something like that, they shouldn't be belittled that they're not a proper entrepreneur, or you haven't really experienced it unless you go all in. Like, I just think it's a dangerous path to go down. And just because it works for some people, and it does work for some people, like some people really like to have back against the wall, pure survival mode. This is where the best comes out. And I get that. I really do get that. But I don't think it's fair that they force that on others, and that they should accept that other people are wired in slightly different ways, and there's different ways of achieving the same goals. It doesn't have to be this is the blueprint, and therefore every single person on planet Earth must follow this to be successful, or a big time entrepreneur, or the real deal, or authentic, or genuine, or I just don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, and definitely held me accountable on a number of times when I get down that rabbit hole, and to be able to kind of come back up and take a breath of fresh air and just kind of realign things.
I think the big thing, Steve, is it's okay to be you. You know, I think there's so many people just wrap themselves up with this kind of like a mix of identity, ego, and what other people think. And I think it's a really dangerous cocktail that if you succumb to it, you can end up in a very kind of precarious place in your life. And at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to walk in our shoes. You know, we're the ones that have to get up every day and look at ourselves in the mirror, and it's our life. Every time other people are seeing it, they're seeing like really brief snapshots, or they're seeing you at an event, or they're having like a Skype call. But when you shut the laptop, they're not seeing the rest of everything else that's going on. And it's you that has to deal with it. It's your family that has to deal with that. And if you want to build a foundation that's maybe not the most conventional foundation, and other people struggle to understand it, and other people kind of might have different ideas, or they might be like, oh, he's not this or she's not that, that's fine. You know, that's their problem. I feel that I've got to the stage in life where I don't really give a shit what other people think. And if it works for me, I mean, I'm more than open to it. And I think it's healthy to have these dialogue and have this conversation. But I'm also happy to go my own way, and just be happy that, look, I've thought about this long and hard, and I've built life the way I have because it works for me. And in times of struggle, like right now, a lot of my friends are in really deep shit because they have gone all in on one thing. You know, and if you've got fingers in pies all over the place, especially diversified globally, you can take hits left and right, and you can wobble a little bit, and you just turn the taps off one or two things, and then you just turn it up on 3 and 4. I think that's a healthier way to go. But at the same time, I do get it, and I do understand the argument that if you don't go all in, you're never going to maximize this single opportunity. I do understand that, and I'm not saying that you should spread your focus too wide either, because you end up diluting anything and not really achieving much.
Well, I think that's the fun thing with Wonder and Wonder is that we're exposed to lots of different conversations and communities and cultures, and to be able to experiment without having to go too deep financially, and be able to try new things. And obviously we're talking about projects in tourism and projects in like what the future looks like, and being able to find a way where you bring a collective of people in that is not financially too deep going in, to be able to experiment, to try new things. And I think this time is kind of testing that theory a little bit. A lot of people experimenting while they can in this new normal. I don't want to leave out flying, because you sent me something last week about Sling Aircraft and the South African guys designing this thing and flying around Namibia and landing in incredible places. And my hairs go up on the back of my neck when I see that type of stuff, because that just is built into my DNA, and I'm sure it did to you as well. You're like getting this itch to go, maybe Matty Pry is going to fly around Africa, and he's trying to teach Steve how to do low altitude flying again. Not that low, what I saw in that movie. But what do you miss about the military and flying fast jets and being in that environment, which is different to any other environment?
Yes, it is different. I miss the, most of all, I miss the good people. And I want to stress that, because as with anything, not all of them like are amazing, but there really is like a certain niche in the military who they're just my kind of people down to a T, in terms of they're ambitious, they're professional, they're very into sport, they've got really good hearts, they're very competitive, they're very loyal, they're outgoing, they stick to their word. I mean, all these things to me now, they just seem like normal. But when I jumped into the civilian world, I really struggled. Like, I really struggled to realize, okay, not everyone is like this, and this is going to take a little bit of adapting. I also miss just the whole reason I joined the military was for a number of reasons, but ultimately I saw it as like the ultimate experience in terms of you're testing yourself in the ultimate environment, doing things that not many people get to do in very kind of fast, dynamic situations where you really are putting your life on your line, and other people are trusting you. And it's just such a unique experience. I mean, flying low level all over the UK at high speeds is just, it just puts a smile on my face. I really miss it, Steve. I really do. I mean, it was something that I'm so glad that I dedicated that amount of time of my life towards that. I'm really glad that it's given me the foundation that it has. It shows you kind of really what you're capable of and how far you can push yourself. And it's ingrained things in me that I'll never lose, and that I try to help other people with in terms of just personal and professional standards, just realizing that by operating at that level, and if you can get lots of other people to operate on that level, and then you put a team together and you have a mission or you have a goal, it's just amazing how kind of seamless it all works if you've got these standard operating procedures, which is another big part of the military, where ultimately everybody is on the same page, and you can turn up and everybody knows it so well that there's actually very few words you need to speak. You know, you just need to say, this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to leave. This is what kit we need. See you in 10 minutes. Leave, you know? And then it just all kind of just happens with this really well-oiled machine. And this has been built up over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so, obviously when I'm flying an airline, and sometimes I joke, I shouldn't really joke about this sort of stuff, but
no, you should.
But sometimes, like if you get a decompression in an airliner, there's a certain procedure that you have to go through. And also now you're multi-crew, so you have to kind of share the roles. So you do your bit, they do their bit, and then you kind of cross-check each other a little bit just to make sure that ultimately the plane is going down quickly, and we've all got our oxygen on. But in a jet, you just roll upside down and pull. And so in the early days, we used to joke about. It's like, Matt, what are you going to do? When I was in an airliner, I'm just going to roll upside down and pull, and just to wind them up a bit in terms of their faces were just like, you can't do that, you can't do that. It's like, I'm just joking, because these emergency procedures specifically get really, really drilled into you, in terms of they just become second nature. And so sometimes when you are going through these emergency procedures again in another aircraft with a different set of SOPs, the old ones pop up because they've been, in the military especially, like they really focus on emergency procedures. Like it's a really, really big deal that you're practicing all the time. So that it's all to do with operational environment. Yeah. So if something happens, your body reacts. You don't even have to think. Suddenly your arms and your hands and your brain and your mouth are just doing things that you've practiced so much. And before you know it, most of the stuff has been done. The hardest thing is, and they always teach you this, is just to sit on your hands for a couple of seconds before you do anything, because it's actually dangerous just to jump straight in and just start flicking switches and talking to people and knee-jerk reactions, because you can actually exacerbate the situation and make it a bit worse. Now, in the airline industry, it's a little bit different. Like I say, it's multi-crew. It's not as dynamic. They still teach you to sit on your hands, but it is quite interesting how everybody thinks we don't do anything and autopilot does everything. But the way I always describe it is, I would agree with them to a large extent, but when it does go wrong, it goes wrong in a really, really bad way, very, very quickly. And if you get a cargo fire, the whole aircraft can burn up in 16 minutes. And you can arguably only really fly just over 100 miles. And so suddenly, from sitting there, drinking your coffee, looking out the window, just very relaxed environment, to middle of the night, thunderstorms, nowhere to land, the whole plane's going to burn up in 16 minutes. What are you going to do? You haven't got time to dick around, And so that whole military mindset comes back a little bit in terms of you need to make some quick decisions.
So for all the nervous flyers out there, I'll have to put a disclaimer on the on this one. 16 minutes. It's a nice fact that I probably didn't want to know about, but that's all good. But the whole crisis management thing, and what obviously I've only gone through to PPL level and nothing to like a military level, but flying, and it's all about procedures and the SOPs, or the standard operating procedures. But I think now, how many individuals, either in personal or in business, have standard operating procedures and have a whole bunch of scenarios. Like, we can talk flying is like you have 20 different scenarios based on and build out procedures for that. And I'm like, that must have prepared you much better than anyone else. Kind of, we've had this conversation through what we're going through this scenario, that you kind of prepped and you've built this life tracker tool that you use, and I've seen based on a lot of the learnings that you've got from military, and then going and creating the Matt Pryor Adventure Academy, and also Adventure X, this whole exploration and taking people out of the comfort zone, but still having these standard operating procedures. Because I feel like a lot of people are going on adventures and exploring and trying new things, but they don't have this is a broad conversation, but they don't have a baseline of their standard operating procedures, if we're just using this as an example. So it has better prepared you. And how do you think people can instill standard operating procedures in their life? And you can frame it so many different ways: purpose, values, and then the actual mechanics of having your own standard operating procedures book for you as a human, or as you as a business. Shit, that's just that's many questions.
It is a big question, Steve. I mean, really, really quickly, SOPs in business is pretty simple, because you ultimately just start bouncing off the sides and start working out, okay, how do you do this task? This is how I do it. It's almost like outsourcing. If you're gonna teach it to a virtual assistant or something like that, you have to know the task so well yourself. You have to document it all so well, and then you almost have to give it to a 5-year-old and see if they can follow that process. And I'm not saying that that's demeaning. I'm just saying that it needs to be that simple and that obvious, and just almost like bullet by bullet by bullet. This is how I do this procedure, and then it gets documented. and then the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one, and then ultimately you just end up with this huge book of SOPs. But the big thing to remember is things change. And when things change, the SOPs need to change. And then the other thing that I don't like about SOPs is sometimes they can be a bit too rigid. You know, like sometimes you come across a scenario that is outside that box. And I see this a lot in Asia in terms of it's very black and white, and you can tell they're ultimately just following a flowchart, which is a simplified version of an SOP. It's like, if this happens, do this. If that happens, do this. If this happens, do that. And that's all great with kind of simple everyday tasks. But it's like, well, actually, you can't really put this, whatever this is, in that box. But because you've now led us down a little bit of the wrong avenue. And so I think SOPs, again, they're great for a foundation. They're great for a fallback. But I do think that you need to have an open mind. And again, with emergencies, just coming back to flying a little bit, it's like, these are the SOPs, this is what you do. But in an emergency situation, the captain of the aircraft does have the right to lean on things a little bit, left or right, if he or she feels that that would be a better course of action. And I think that's a healthy way to approach it. Same with life. Like you can have all sorts of, I mean, it's up to you if you want to write them down or not. I'd say that mine are a bit more automated in my head, but you can use it as the broad brush, bang, something bad happened. Okay, sit down, calm down. What's the basic stuff you need to do? Let's prioritize, let's execute these things. But then there's always going to be things outside the SOP. So I'd say it's a great foundation, but I don't think it's the be all and end all. But it's interesting. So a lot of people I went through the Air Force with, they're now leaving and going all over the world and into lots of different careers. And actually a big part of what they're doing is bringing SOPs to their businesses, because they just can't understand how a group of people can operate without this kind of common playbook.
Well, I love the Afterburner Inc., which obviously a very successful training organization based of F-18 Top Guns coming out of the Air Force in the US. And it's the simple book of plan, brief, execute, debrief. And that kind of rings through in my mind. And sometimes you go off track and you come back to it. It's pretty simple, the actual, but being able to break things down. In life, like obviously I use this analogy as well as about like the plane being the vehicle, and are we flying correctly to our destination? And there's so many analogies in that, and I know you kind of think that way. And what do you think the world's just shaking us up right now to kind of get us to fly our vehicles a little bit differently, meaning life? Like there has been a massive shake up in the last 8 weeks, or longer for you being close to Asia, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm a bit strange in the way I look at things, Steve, but I'm very optimistic kind of person. I'm very open to things. I like cheerfulness in the face of adversity. That's like a Royal Marines thing. And so when anything like this happens, I just see kind of opportunity, and I see that there's only good things that are going to come off the back of this. And I know that whether we're individually being shaken up, whether that's a forced transition, or collectively being shaken up, which is a bit like now, it provides that period of reflectiveness. It provides that time to sort of stop and assess everything and analyze things and question things. I think that's the biggest thing, like questioning your current beliefs, questioning where you're going and why, questioning who you're surrounding yourself with. And I think only good things can come of this. And even if you have lots of conversations and nothing really changes, I think it's just good to, at least you've been through that process, you know?
What questions are you asking yourself at the moment? Like,
I ask myself these things a lot, mate. It's almost to the point where I'm like Steve Jobs did that speech, and he always says something along the lines of like, if you look at yourself in the mirror every single day and you get to the point where you're really not doing what you really want to be doing consecutively for a number of days, you've really got to start changing things. Now, I don't believe in the whole cliche in terms of you should live every day as if it's your last, and every single day is full of in like roses and everything's amazing and spend all your money, and you know, like I just don't believe in all that sort of stuff. But I do think that it's very important that you continually assess and you continually review And just coming back to that life tracker thing a little bit, that's what I use that for in terms of my life is on a whiteboard, broad brush, and it all makes sense to me. But I regularly revisit it because it really makes me think like, well, is that relevant anymore? Or this doesn't really line up with this anymore. It's great to experiment. It was good to give it a go. It made sense 6 months ago, but stuff's changed, or this person's not interested anymore. Or
can you give us an example of that? Like, because I love the whole cycle thing. How do you continuous improvement?
Yeah.
I think that's a Japanese thing, isn't it? And we have these conversations all the time. It's like, what is important right now? Am I past that scenario? How do I improve that aspect of my life? And for me, it's on relationships. But for you, like, kind of what's that an example right now that you're kind of going, okay, it's time to move past that and click it back into the life tracker or something new?
Yeah, okay, I'll give you a great example, mate. In terms of, I knew after the last recession, whatever I did going forward, I wanted to make sure it was future-proof and recession-proof, right? And if it wasn't, what's your plan? I saw a recession kind of coming, but no one really knows what the trigger is. What's the black swan? Like, is it going to be something that's predictable, or is it going to be something a bit like Corona that just kind of came out of nowhere? But it's actually irrelevant what the trigger was, because eventually it was going to trigger what we're now living in. Maybe not the full shutdown aspect of it, but definitely a deep recession, because real problems were not solved with the system back in 07, 08, and we are where we are. And I always knew that anything to do with discretionary spending is going to get hit hard. And so I got to the point where I just operate things so lean, and basically everything's on a contract basis.
I'll come out in a minute. Okay. There we go. That's the new normal, homeschooling. I appreciate that, and I'm on the same path with you on that. And we've had this, how lean can you get the aircraft to fly? Whether it's that documentary watching the other day, is like, how lean do you get that perfect mixture? It can keep flying for a long time.
I guess if you want to bring it back to the plane, that's ultimately what it's doing. And so my point was always, if this happens.
Hey, buddy. Okay. I'm just doing a podcast, buddy. I'm interviewing a pilot, a friend of mine. Yeah. Okay. 2 seconds. Right. Keep chatting about your life tracker, Chan.
Oh yeah, I just talk to myself.
There we go.
Yeah, Steve, so just to kind of finish it off, mate, it's nice to put these things which sound great in theory into practice. You know, It's like, okay, you can turn them off and stick them on a shelf, but there's still annoying ongoing costs that I just can't do anything about at the moment. For example, like accountancy costs, for whatever reason in Hong Kong, because there's lots of money laundering and stuff like that here, accountancy is a really big part of operating costs. And there's compulsory auditing every single year, you know, like in a lot of other countries, it's random audits here. And so whatever I do, I cannot get rid of certain costs. And so I just have to accept, like, you either suck it up, or do you behind the scenes close the business down until it's ready to start back up again and then restart? I'm just talking paperwork wise now, really. Do you then just restart up and save those costs? Or do you think actually this might turn around quicker than what we thought? I just need to ride this out for 6 months and then be ready to go again. And so that's definitely something that I'm using it as an opportunity to optimize and improve and question and challenge, and how can I make this better? Because, you know, normally through normal life, we're just busy, and you never get time just to stop, reassess, how can I make this better? And so I've gone through that process, but there comes a time where you've really just pushed, and it's just time just to stick that on the shelf for a little bit and then review the rest of life. I'm like, okay, I've got excess energy. Where can I direct that in a useful way that I want to do that? And that's what this kind of life tracker thing that I use is so good for, because it's an accountability mirror based on your own truths. And it's very important that you're honest with yourself, because the more honest you be, when you step back, it's very obvious where you need to send your energy. You know, it's very, very obvious. There's just a few spaces where it's just like, well, it makes sense for me now to maybe not go all in on, but definitely a deep dive on this or that.
Mate, I love it and can't wait to keep diving deeper into the life tracker stuff offline. But what is keeping you most excited about right now? Obviously, we're pretty optimistic individuals as we kind of surrender to a few things and kind of let go of you. And then, but yeah, what are you most excited about right now?
In a nutshell, like I was already winding back quite a lot before this happened because I've got a baby coming in a few months. So I'm looking forward to that whole next chapter of life and being a dad. And then with this space, plus the coronavirus, plus the kind of downturn in terms of just work, means that it allows us to have times and conversation with you and spitball on a few ideas. And we're talking about various expeditions, which are really interesting in terms of not just cutting edge tech, but riding very fine political lines. And that's the stuff that keeps me going, mate. Like that's the stuff that fires me up. And it's just nice to, rather than get up and think, oh my God, I've got all this shit to do and I'm just going to be flat out busy. And then before you know it, it's like 11 PM and you're falling back to sleep again. You're just thinking, do you know what? I've got a few hours to test this and I can have a conversation with this person and I can really think about this idea. I can go for like a 3-hour hike and let this kind of ponder a bit. I can check in with this. So I'm just loving it, mate. I know it sounds really messed up and I know there's a
lot of pain, a lot of hurt out there. There's a lot of people dying out there, but I'm
very aware of all that sort of stuff, and I'm helping out the best we can do, and we're still flying medical supplies. And every time we land wherever, like I know that I'm taking a huge risk in terms of bringing it back to my wife, who's obviously pregnant. So I feel like I am doing my bit, and I'm checking in with people who I know who have been hit hard, and especially like elderly relatives and all that sort of stuff. I think if you can look after your own few circles and then everyone else does that, then that covers a lot of the world. But at the same time, I think it's very important not to end up on this kind of declining negative spiral, which just doesn't help anyone, you know? I think you've got to be optimistic, but realistic.
Yeah, and you are definitely you are a frontline worker if you look at it that way in regards to medical supplies getting to the right place and going into some pretty vulnerable spaces. Like right now, we're locked down in New Zealand and you can't even go get a coffee, let alone get across to see Sarah in Melbourne and that sort of stuff. So yeah, man, take my hat off to you for doing your part and in this interesting environment that we go through. We didn't really have too much time to chat but I want to make time on the travel events and experiences. And obviously we are deep in the trenches with being able to bring transformational experiences to people, whether it's through adventure, whether it's through the retreats that I put on, and some pretty epic adventures that you put around all the world. And obviously that pretty much got cut off overnight, and it's something that's built into me and your DNA. It's just, we thrive on finding adventure, finding new places, taking people into new environments and getting them experiencing new cultures, having new conversations. I'm missing that massively, and people saying pivot online and all this sort of stuff and all this noise about doing what, and I'm like, you know what, nothing can ever take away the experience of going to a new environment, a new experience with people, and having that visceral energy of experience. How are you feeling about it, man?
It's good though, Steve, because it sometimes, you know, like it's like that whole you don't realize what you've got till it's gone, you know, and that covers kind of like relationships and people, but also what you really love. Like, and sometimes I think a lot of us take things for granted, and you don't realize how much you take it for granted until it is taken away. And I think, again, even just that, Steve, even just understanding that how much we do love it and that appreciation that we do have for those things, just shows you that needs to continue to be a big part of my life. And I really, maybe even a bigger part of my life, you know, maybe I need to go even deeper on that, because that's what I really miss. I mean, a strange similar type of example is since I moved to Hong Kong, I really started missing fresh air and green grass. That sounds like really strange, right? Because you just take it for granted when you live in the UK or New Zealand. You see it all day, every day. You breathe it. It's just like a totally normal thing. And a bit like you and me just travel all the time. We're on and off airplanes. We're meeting people. We're going through new experiences, like several adventures all through the year. It's just, it becomes part of your life. It's almost like oxygen. And so when someone turns that off, you suddenly feel a little bit different, and you have to look at yourself and think, well, why? And then you kind of zero in on what's missing and what that means to you, and why that means that. And maybe that's a good challenge in itself. Like, why does it mean it? And can you still be whole? And why is that required? Or is it just like something that just makes you better? Or is it a fundamental part of your being? You know, I refuse to allow, just because that's not there, I'm not going to be happy, you know?
Using the word oxygen, it's trying to, understanding where your oxygen comes from. Like, we just, and using that analogy in different parts of your life, and oxygen, definitely is the travel and the wander aspect. And Sarah said to me this morning, because we always do our self check-ins every day about kind of where we're sitting out of 10, and both of us were like kind of sitting at a 4 this morning. It's like, man, the suffocation of the physical touch, or just being in the space of humans, is kind of getting to the point of like, oh man, I'm just dying for a bit of that oxygen, to be able to jump on a plane and be around people and sit down and have a meal and be close to Sarah and that sort of stuff. So
I get it, mate.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Well, you can start to see now, though, even around the world, there's sorts of cracks of developing. There's more and more kind of people slowly going out and protesting, and now the weather's getting better, maybe not your part of the world, but the Northern Hemisphere. And people, they want to go outside, you know, and I think for everybody, this will just bring this new life and appreciation for nature, and being outside and being around loved ones and kind of having fun and spreading your wings and being in big wide spaces. Like, it's, again, I think this is a good thing, and hopefully environmentally this will be a good thing collectively, in terms of maybe people that didn't appreciate it as much as maybe they do now, just as simple as a walk, you know. For some people through this lockdown, in Hong Kong, for example, we've been fortunate enough, we've never been told that we can't go for a walk. But in some countries, they have been literally told to stay in their house for weeks. Or even
I saw Spain, 44 days, and finally kids under the age of 12 go outside. 44 days. I'm like,
you've got kids, imagine.
Yeah, I've just literally, and I don't think that's we'll probably wrap things up, but I don't think we're taking stock of the actual emotional and mental strain that it's taking on, especially kids as well. Like, I can see a bit of stress and anxiety on my kids not seeing their friends, and that's what they live for every day. So I think the actual tail of this coronavirus medical thing might start to get better, but we'll see this other little spike of like, oh jeepers, people didn't really cope that well with isolation and quarantine and all that sort of stuff. And there's the pros and cons of it, but hey, we're on the pro side. It's like, it's getting us to think differently. It's getting us to be a lot more grateful, and fingers crossed we'll be able to chow down a beer sometime soon.
Yeah, but I think it's important what you're saying, Steve, and I think all of us are going through it to some extent, in terms of there's definitely pain. There's definitely a hard side. There's people that have lost their jobs. There's people that, like you say, you've got multiple kids. You're trying to homeschool. You're isolated from what your normal life is, and then you've got the next transition in terms of when they suddenly open up. Life's not just going to go back to a normal immediately. Like, it's going to be strange for people now going back to normal. What is normal? But you can be normal, but sort of normal. You have to keep this distance, and you must do this in restaurants, and you can't do international flight, but you can do domestic flight. And there's going to be all these strange restrictions. And I think that is going to add to it as well. And like you say, I think it's going to be a long processing time. It's not just going to be a snap your fingers and everyone will go back to normal. But I do hope that people look on this positively and try and take the upsides rather than zero in on the downsides.
Well, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed that everyone can come back above the line and get back into the things they're very grateful for, and we can go from there. But Matt, really appreciate your time today. And there's only 2 people I know that's done the old double transition. It's another Matt Hall. He's still flying air races around the world, but you're another one in regards to that transitioning. I know we share a lot of alignment and values, and can't wait to have you back in our neck of the woods, maybe for a little bit longer. So I appreciate your time, your wisdom, and just sharing so much good stuff today, man.
Cheers, Steve. I'm happy to stay on after this, mate, if you want to have a further conversation.
Awesome, mate. I'll just finish that up and